Hello and welcome to a new edition of the Go Club podcast. This is your host, Edwin Delgado. And today we are about to start talking about the 30th MLS season that starts this weekend. And to talk all about it, we have Joseph Lowery of basketball.com. Joseph, thank you so much for accepting the invite. How's it going, man?
It's good. Thank you so much for having me, Edwin. How are you?
Doing excellent. Thank you so much. So yeah, it's an exciting time. Year 30 for MLS. We have the 30th franchise coming in with San Diego FC. So let me just put a pin on that real quick. I was telling you off the recording that we're doing something different for this podcast for this year. So I'm gonna lay out a weird situation that has happened somewhere in world soccer. I'll give some clues. We'll leave that in the back burner, and then we'll circle back to it at the end.
I
See
like
if,
it.
if we can figure out what happened. So let me just go, bear with me real quick so I can go back to my document here. So, okay, here it is. In 2014, a Colombian team that lost the league final. Well, let me rephrase that. In 2014, a Colombian team lost the league final. However, more than 24 hours later, the fans in the city where the club is from started going out to the streets to celebrate the title of their team. So, for everyone listening and for you, can you guess what happened? We'll circle that back at the end for that one. But for now, let's get started with MLS. So, first and foremost, what are you most intrigued by? What are you most excited about this new MLS season that kicks off this weekend?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind for me. The first is San Diego joining the league as the 30th team in the 30th season, which works out quite well unintentionally. So I'm sure San Diego are approaching things in a fascinating way as an expansion franchise. I think they're going to be a more interesting one to watch than the last several sort of that have entered Major League Soccer. When you think about St. Louis, think about Austin, as good as those teams were, fairly quickly into their MLS existence, both have kind of fallen back down to earth. San Diego are a harder team to know what to expect from. They've signed some big time players, and Chucky Lozano, who's their first ever signing on that left wing as a DP, first ever DP signing. They've added Anders Dreyer from Anderlecht, a really good team over in Belgium, and he's put up good numbers there. They've added Luca De La Torre, who's been capped by the U.S. men's national team 20 plus times. They have some really impressive pieces, but it's not so much those pieces that really intrigue me. It is how they want to play, for one thing, which is they've referenced the Columbus Crew a bunch of times throughout the preseason so far. I've talked with their sporting director, Tyler Heaps, and he brought up the Columbus Crew, Wilfred Nance's Columbus Crew in particular, who dominate the ball. They control possession, they build from the back in a way that we've honestly never seen any other MLS team do. San Diego want to do that, and that's a difficult thing to do when you're starting from nothing. It's a difficult thing to do, period. And Columbus have done it really well, but it's not easy. San Diego are really eager to be a hyper possession oriented sort of team. It's going to make them fun to watch. And I think they've got the top end talent to be quite good. I also think they've got a really low floor as far as this season goes. Maybe the style doesn't quite work. You're building everything from scratch. Mike Ibarras has never coached at the professional level before in this way. And you've got a bunch of players that don't know each other very well. And the defense is not the strong part of this squad. They could concede a lot of goals. They could have a little trouble building from the back. I think they're going to be a fascinating team to watch. The other thing that I'm really excited to see this year outside of Inter Miami, and I'm curious to watch them as well because we only have so many more times to watch Leo Messi play soccer. The
Yeah.
other thing is, it seems to me that the quality of coaching in this league is getting better and better, where more and more teams have distinctive styles, and San Diego are going to be a good example of that. Rather than everybody playing a 4-2-3-1 and sitting in a mid block and trying to attack in transition, there are more teams doing interesting things now than I think we've seen maybe ever in this league. So there's a lot of different teams and tactics and players and roster builds that I think are really quite fun. But those are some of the things and trends that are really top of mind for me coming into the year.
And speaking of coaching, I mean, what are the new faces that we're going to see from coaches in MLS? Which one are you most interested in seeing how it pans out? Obviously, we have Marciano at Miami, you have Ronnie Dala at Atlanta, and a few others. So, which one is the one that, or which ones are the ones that you're intrigued by the most?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So I'm trying to think through the list here of new managers that have come in so far this offseason. You think about, I think there's been 12 new coaches that have arrived so far this year. Thinking about some of the ones you mentioned, Ronnie Dyla, I think the Atlanta team is going to be really good. I don't think Dyla is a particularly interesting tactician. I think he does a lot of really standard, kind of straightforward stuff. But that's probably what this Atlanta group needs. They went out and got a lot better this offseason. They broke the league's incoming transfer fee record to sign Emmanuel Latte for $22 million. From Middlesbrough, they brought back Miguel Almiron. There's a lot to like there. Nico Estevez is in Austin. Eric Quill is over in Dallas. Marcherano already got mentioned. The one maybe that hasn't been mentioned so far that I think is particularly interesting is Greg Berhalter, who's back in Major League Soccer after his time coaching the U.S. men's national team. MLS has changed a lot since he's been back. He's also in a dual role where he's in charge of the front office and of the day-to-day coaching side. I'm curious to see how he's changed tactically. I asked him a little bit about that late last year, and he talked about how his fire team is probably going to look something like a crossover between how his crew teams of old did and how the U.S. looked under him. But Berhalter is just an interesting character. I think he's a good soccer mind, and I'm looking forward to seeing what his Chicago Fire team looks like because it's going to look a lot different. I'm pretty sure of that.
Awesome. So now, one of the things that caught my eye this offseason is obviously the rule changes to make it more easier to have the cash transactions between
Mm.
MLS clubs. Uh, and I think it's been very interesting to see like all the different movements between the teams. So which are the signings overall, not just between MLS teams, but what are the new signings that were most surprised by or most intrigued by?
Yeah, you mentioned the cash trade rule, and that sort of does help facilitate some high level players moving within Major League Soccer. And the Evander deal, where Cincinnati paid $12 million for Evander to sign him from the Portland Timbers, we've never been able to see that before in Major League Soccer, where previously teams couldn't spend real money to purchase one of another MLS team's players. Evander wasn't happy in Portland. He wanted to move somewhere. Previously, we would have seen that take him outside of Major League Soccer because no team in MLS could put together a package of assets that would be worth what a player like he's worth on the global market. Now Cincinnati can pay eight figures for someone who's already an MLS star. I love that move. I think it's a fascinating one. It is why that rule exists, first and foremost. Not necessarily that deal in particular, but that sort of move is why this rule exists. I think it's a good thing for the league. It's great at making stories and storylines, and Portland fans can watch Cincy with some sort of envy and maybe wish them the worst this season, and vice versa when other players move. I think that's good. I think more stories is a good thing. We need more of those, and I don't think MLS does always the best job of sort of propping some of those things up. But I do like that move. I mentioned the Latte Loft move. I think that's fascinating. Columbus moving Cucho Hernandez over to Real Betis, how they replace Cucho Hernandez after being, if not the best, one of the handful of best teams in MLS over the last 2 years, with Wilfred Nancy on the sidelines and Cucho kind of orchestrating a lot of things on the field. I think that's going to be really interesting to see. One that's flown a little bit under the radar that I'm really curious about is Charlotte FC bringing in Wilfred Zaha, former Crystal Palace star. They've got him on loan for the year with an option to extend from Galatasaray, Turkey Giants. Christian Benteke has done quite well at DC United, another former Crystal Palace player. I am curious to see if one of his teammates, one of his ex-teammates, Wilfred Zaha, has a lot of success too. They play different positions. They'll be in different style teams. I don't think Zaha will have quite that much impact, but I think he's a really talented player who's been in a bad situation at club level. This one will be a lot better for him.
Already. And we were talking about the Evander move to Cincinnati. I think one of the moves that surprised me at first was actually Cincinnati moving from Lucio Acosta, who was the MVP 2 years ago, going to Dallas, and then with the signing of Evander, it makes more sense now. But what do you make of what Cincinnati is trying to do? I forgot this sign as well.
Yeah, Kevin Denke is the
Yeah,
striker.
the kid who scored in Conca Champions Cup this week also. Uh, what do you make of what Cincinnati is building?
Yeah, I mean, Cincinnati, as far as their roster builds are concerned, I think have been another one of those model MLS teams, really since Pat Noonan came in as manager and Chris Albright came in as general manager to run the front office. They've transformed in a real way and they've become a go-to destination for free agents. We saw that with Miles Robinson. They've done a great job of scouting talent as well, and I think in a lot of ways that they haven't quite been able to hit on is that striker, where they signed Aaron Mupenza, who was a phenomenal player on the field, but was sort of a little bit of a head case off the field. And they just were looking and looking, and they tried to get a deal over the line last summer that would maybe push them into MLS Cup contention, and they just couldn't do it. Now this team is done it. They've added Kevin Deke, who I think is going to be a really good player in this league, and Evander is a phenomenal fill-in for Lucho Acosta, who left because according to him, he and Chris Albright did not get along, and definitely didn't see eye to eye, and he didn't respect or appreciate how Chris Albright was running the organization, and that's what led Lucio Acosta to want to leave and FC Dallas come in and pay $5 million for him. So there are some concerns about how all the personalities are managed in Cincinnati, and that the player you're bringing in to replace the guy who forced his way out of the club and Lucho Acosta is another player who forced his way out of a different MLS club and Evander. There are concerns there. Yuya Kubo and Luca Oriano sat out a big chunk of preseason. I don't believe Luca Oriano traveled down to play in that CONCACAF game. Uh, it's a bit messy right now, but the squad that they have built is awesome if all the pieces are actually there and bought in.
Yeah, absolutely. So now talking about the is there a signing that you saw and said this makes sense? It is a signing that you really really love. I'll give you an example of the one that really come out and said this is great for player and team.
Hmm.
Jesus Ferreira going from Dallas to
Hmm.
Seattle because I mean, a few years ago when Will Burn moved from the Dynamo to Seattle, I mean, he's not as talented as Pereira, but he was a great number 2-9 for the Sounders to have. So now moving away from Rui Diaz, bringing someone younger, uh, and having all the talent around them seems like a really good fit for Pereira and the Sounders.
I love that. My eyes were scrolling down the list of MLS teams to try and spark some inspiration here. And Ferreira was absolutely the one that came to mind when I hit Seattle before you were going there. I mean, I think it's a great move from Seattle. They had the best defense in MLS last year based off of non-penalty expected goals. I think also based off of goals allowed. They were phenomenal defensively. The attack was not good. And they were still, despite that, a few minutes away from a penalty shootout that could have gotten them to MLS Cup, right? They were still a really, really good team last year. And so what happens in the offseason? Well, Craig Weibel goes out and trades for Jesus Ferreira, who didn't seem super happy in Dallas, was eager for a change. I think likes the idea of being in the shop window during the Club World Cup. And all of a sudden, now you have Jesus Ferreira to add to an attack that was supposed to be better last year, right? Pedro de la Vega was a $7.5 million signing from Lanús in Argentina, and he gave them nothing. He was barely healthy, and he wasn't effective when he was on the field. Didn't seem like Brian Schmetzer knew exactly how he wanted to use de la Vega in the first place, and it just didn't work. This year, Ferreira is a super proven commodity in MLS. He was still putting up decent to good numbers for an FC Dallas team that didn't give him much help and didn't give him much stability. If he's healthy, he's going to be, I think, a really effective player for Seattle, who didn't do the most glamorous business this offseason, but absolutely did address their key area of need. One other, I guess, one that sort of does come to mind for me in all of this is DC United going out there and they completely revamped their entire goalkeeping core. This is just a move that I think is going to be curious and interesting. They dumped all of their goalkeepers from last season, where they were one of the teams in the league in terms of their overall defending and then also their shot stopping. And they went out to sign the first U22 initiative goalkeeper in MLS history, and Kim Jun Hong, who's coming over from his native South Korea. I just think it's an interesting move. It makes sense. You can see DC going through the process of picking out, hey, we know this was a weakness for us last year. Let's clean house and go and add some more talent. DC are not going to be very good this year, and they've got a lot of work to do. At least that's my guess. But that's another move that makes sense, along with maybe Colorado going and doing some strengthening within the league to grab a few guys in San Jose trading for Chicho Arango, which I really like.
Already. So out of the what was it? Well, let's switch back the conversation with San Jose now. This to me it's very interesting that they're gonna pair Chicho Arango with Joseph Martinez up front. San Jose not known for making big splash, big moves in every year. They usually make one or two big main moves every couple of years, and now it seems that they're putting a lot more talent together with Hernan Lopez and MOBC and much more talent that they're adding. So what's your take on how the team is building in San Jose?
Yeah, Bruce Arena has come in and he's asked for more investment from ownership. And I think we've seen that with some of the players that they've gone out to go and look for and some of the other changes that they're trying to make at the club. Didn't have to spend a ton of real money, didn't have to spend any real money to get Chicho Arango, but they do have to pay him. Joseph Martinez is another sort of statement signing, even though it's not the same Joseph Martinez as we know from years past. Bruce Arena is going to make this team competent. Again, I don't think they're going to be great this year because frankly, I don't think you can play Joseph and Chicho together up top and expect to have a lot of solidity defensively. Maybe I'll be wrong on that. I guess we'll find out. I'm still really worried about the midfield. Bruce Arena went out and grabbed a couple of his guys from the Revs and Mark Anthony Kaye and Ian Harkes. I just don't think there's a lot of talent in that central midfield group, and defensively they're going to be better certainly, but they gave up 78 goals last year, which was more than any other team has more than any team has ever done in this league. It's a concern. It's absolutely a concern. Goalkeeping is too, but Daniel should be back and hopefully a bit better for them this season. So they're going to be a much, much harder team to beat in 2025. They will score some goals too, but I'm not a big believer in Hernan Lopez. Not a big believer in almost anybody in that central midfield group. and I think there are still some major holes in this team. So I don't think they are, I guess, quite out of the spoon running just yet, even if they've gone from being favorites to end up with a spoon again this year to, yeah, maybe they're just kind of just outside that pack of teams that you would expect to maybe be at the bottom of their conference.
What does give me a little bit of hope for San Jose is that I guess the Revolution was in a similar situation before Bruce
For
Arena came
sure.
in. And then you start seeing from going from Witherspoon to a couple of years later being in the hunt
Yeah.
for the community supporter shield. Uh, so now, I mean, obviously, a lot of the talk is always centered around the LA clubs, the Ohio clubs, the New York clubs, Seattle, Atlanta, Miami. You already talked about San Diego, but what is like one team that maybe people are not really mentioning too much about that you're intrigued to see and you think it can be a threat or can at least have a potential to do really well and go deep into the postseason?
I think Charlotte really is that team that comes to mind for me. They had the best goalkeeper in MLS last year in Christian Kalina. They have three really strong top tier center backs in this league between Malanda and Privet and Ream. They've got a strong spine, and they've got a DP in Wilfred Zaha, who is potentially a game changer, along with Patrick Ajuman, who has developed into one of the most promising younger forwards in American soccer, who's impressed at the U.S. men's national team level in January camp. That is a bit of a different situation, but he's a rising star in this league. And if Charlotte get more out of their attack this year, and they get even equal production out of their defense, they could really push for a home playoff game. I think I guess multiple home playoff games in the new format. I think they could push for a top four seed in the Eastern Conference. I predicted them third in the East this year, behind Miami and behind Cincinnati. Columbus absolutely are in contention there. Same with Atlanta. I don't know that Charlotte are going to end up in third, obviously, but I can see this team's ceiling being quite high, not supporter shield high, but very, very high. And I think their floor is super high. Defensively, they're going to be strong yet again. And I don't envision a world in which Wilfred Zaha is a total flop as a DP. Maybe that's possible, but even if that's the case, you didn't really lose anything in the offseason. You lost Karol Swiderski. He wasn't really a needed piece last year with Patrick Ajuman breaking out. So I just don't see this group losing a lot, even if some of their pieces, even if some of their pieces aren't quite as good as I think they can be this year. Charlotte are going to be a team to watch.
Yeah, for sure. So moving into more specifically some of the players that are playing now in new clubs, we already talked obviously about some of them. But what are some of the other signings that you're intrigued because maybe this player wasn't doing great where he was, but is now moving to a better situation? I'm thinking like the Brandon Vasquez of the world. Like, what are some of the signings that you're most interested to see how they pan out this season?
Yeah, I guess maybe a couple of DPs that have joined the league who weren't lighting things up at their last clubs. The first is Manu Garcia in Sporting Kansas City, who's arriving from Aris in Greece, former Man City youth product, and has kind of had a cup of coffee in a few different leagues and had settled a bit in Greece, but didn't put up amazing, box score stats. From the bit of him that I've watched and from what other really, smart watchers have told me, he looks like a promising player. I think he's got a lot of potential to be a difference-making number 10 for the Sporting Kansas City team. I don't know that he's going to be a slam dunk. I still need to see more of him, but he wasn't at the super glamorous club situation. The other one that comes to mind for me is David Acosta, who is the replacement for Evander over in Portland, signed for $6 million from Lens in Liga. He was playing, kind of starting every other game in Liga and not certainly wasn't a go-to player for Lens. I think he looks like a fun signing. Portland absolutely smashed it out of the park with the Evander deal. Even though I was a little critical of that deal when it was first made, I was absolutely wrong about that. DaCosta looks like a fun player, a little more energetic, a little more dribbly than Evander. But I mean, his numbers are pretty good in the tape I've watched. He's a fun player in that central attacking midfield spot. He can drift a little bit wider. Those two guys were not, weren't go-to players, or maybe Garcia was a bit more than DaCosta, but they either weren't go-to players or weren't in super glamorous situations. I think they're both going to be central to their team's hopes in 2025.
Already. Now let's talk about some of the big names in the league. Obviously, with LA Galaxy winning their sixth MLS Cup last year, that got me well reversed. But big move over the summer is moving away from Dejan Jovic, who now goes to Sporting KC, which allowed the move for Sporting KC. But what do you see for LA Galaxy? I mean, still that team runs through Ricky Push, but what do you see are going to be some of the challenges for LA Galaxy and how this team can continue to be a contender.
Well, and even, they absolutely do run through Ricky Puig. The problem is they're going to miss Ricky Puig basically all year long with that torn ACL from the Western Conference Final. Maybe he'll be back towards the end of the year. It's going to be a different Galaxy team. I talked earlier this offseason to Greg Vanney, who's the manager of this team, and Will Kuntz, who's the general manager for this team in charge of the front office, for a story that I wrote over at backheel.com. And this is going to be a different team. They're happy to admit that. They're going to play a little bit differently. Yes, they're still going to keep the ball, but without Ricky Puig, who touches the ball, 125 times a game, that changes how you play. And it's going to be a little bit different, a little more direct at times while still having plenty of the ball. The midfield profiles that the Galaxy went out to look for this winter are different. They're a little more aggressive, a little rangier when you think about someone like Elijah Winder or Sanabria, even though they bring in from South America as a U22 player. Guys who can still play with the ball, but who have some other things that they bring that will let the Galaxy be a little different this year. There's a lot of pressure on Gabriel Peck to be as good this year as he was last year. Joseph Paintsel, sort of the same, and to get something out of Marco Reus, who is sort of the black box for this team, where you don't really know what you're going to get. He hasn't been fit a whole lot, even through large stretches of his career. He was a non-factor for the Galaxy essentially last season. Maybe not. Maybe that's a bit harsh, but he wasn't a super critical player for them after he signed in the summer. They bring in Christian Ramirez to be their new starting striker. There's a lot of change for this Galaxy team. They ran up really tight to the salary cap, and that's why Dejan Joveljic had to move. They couldn't afford to give him the contract that he deserved. They couldn't make him a DP. Mark Delgado traded. Gaston Brugman traded MLS Cup MVP just a few days after he wins MLS Cup MVP. So this is going to be a different team. They're still going to look quite similar in a lot of ways, and I'm still really high on their ceiling. I think they have a ton of talent, even without Ricky Puig. Amiro Garces might be the best center back in this entire league. That's a slam dunk signing that the Galaxy made last year from Colombia. I like a lot of what's going on with the Galaxy, but they're going to be different, and they're probably not going to be quite as good this year as they were last year.
Yeah. And out of the other contenders, I mean, what are some of the moves that you are keeping a close eye on? Whether it's the New York teams, whether it's Miami.
Yeah, I mean, Miami, I think, got better this offseason in a lot of ways. Diego Gomez was a really important play for them last year. Also didn't play a ton of minutes for them in the regular season. He has moved over to Brighton for an eight-figure transfer fee in the Premier League. He's going to be, I think, a really good player for them. But Miami went out and added more quality in central midfield. They signed Telasco Segovia, who had been over in Europe, a young Venezuelan player who's already broken through with the Venezuelan senior national team. They went out and signed Allende over from Celta Vigo. In the attack, it looks like he's going to be their third starting attacker next to Messi and Suarez. Fafa Picault was a great pickup in free agency. And crucially, they got stronger defensively, I think, by signing Lujan, who had worked with Javier Mascherano at the U23s. He's a young Argentine defender who can play center back and play right back. They also signed a guy named Max Falcon from the Chilean top flight, who, in addition to having an awesome name, just gives them another body in a real position of need. They couldn't start this year with Tomas Aviles and David Martinez next to each other. Like it just wasn't going to make sense. And I think strengthening along that back line really does boost Miami's chances this year. They're probably not going to break the points record that they themselves broke last year to set it at 74, but I think they're going to be a really, really good team yet again this year. Like that shouldn't surprise anybody, but I think they have, despite a bunch of chaos happening off the field, addressed the needs in the way that they kind of needed to address them this winter.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's still a lot of it because it's going to depend on how close to how good are both like Messi, Leo Suarez up top. Uh, that's going to dictate a lot of how far the team goes. And obviously, with Messi, it's going to be playing not Copa America because there's no tournament in the summer, but it's going to be World Cup qualifiers, and we'll see how that impacts the uh, Inter Miami. But last year wasn't a huge problem, even though he missed quite a few games.
Yeah. I mean, I think Messi's still going to be every bit as good as he was last year. Same with Suarez. I don't really envision any of those guys taking a step back. I think just the big question is, yeah, can you get enough of those players on the field? And to your point, Edwin, and then can the defense carry the team in a way that it just didn't last year? Or at least, if it can't carry the team, can it like hold on and at least like run without falling over and all those sorts of things? Yeah, Miami are a team that still feel like they have a weirdly low floor in some ways, but man, their ceiling is just absurd.
For sure. And just a quick note, I mean, like, in CONCACAF Champions Cup, there's a potential semifinal matchup between Inter Miami and Monterrey. So we have
Nice.
Sergio Ramos going against Messi,
Now we're
Suarez, and
talking.
Alba.
Let's get Pepe back involved, and then we're really cooking something up. I like it.
So just something to just keep an eye on, just to see if we get the rematch later on. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously, the other guys might take a step back. Columbus still another team that's intriguing to me in the sense that they had to change their attack quite a bit. Uh, so, what do you make of the Columbus Crew for this year?
Yeah, losing Cucho hurts a lot. I think the guy had 29 goal contributions between goals and assists last season. He's one of the best players MLS has ever seen, and it is a credit to him. It's a credit to the Crew uh, that they got him from a Big Five league in Europe, and then they let him shine. They paid him, and then they moved him back to Europe into a great situation at Real Betis, where he's going to be a central player for them. That's a good selling point for the future Cucho Hernandezes that are interested in, or at least maybe sort of thinking about coming to Major League Soccer. That's a good thing. I think it's a good long-term play from the Crew. It hurts them in the short term. There's no doubt about it. There's also questions about how long Wilfred Nance is going to be around because he's probably the best coach we've ever seen in Major League Soccer history, 30 seasons in. He's unbelievable, and we've seen him have success before with CF Montreal when they didn't have a lot of talent, or at least not talent like the Crew had the last couple of years. So I think Columbus are still going to be quite good this year, especially if they go out and sign. They've been connected to Flaco Lopez, who's down in Brazil. If they get that DP through the door fairly quickly to replace Cucho, yeah, I think they're still going to be really good. Are they going to be as good as they were last year? I kind of doubt it. Between losing Cucho and losing Christian Ramirez, that's a lot of goals that just kind of walked out the door. You can replace some of that, and I think Isatal will do some of that. This is his first chance to really shape the squad in his image in charge of that front office. But yeah, it's just hard for me to imagine their team being quite as dangerous this year as they were last year, and that's even before you start to worry about whether or not Will Fernandez is going to be here in September.
Yeah, for sure. And just overall, big picture, what are some of the big storylines that you want to follow through this MLS season?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about a lot of them already. Miami and so what they're able to do this year, they flopped in every knockout competition they were in last year. Will that change? Will they win Champions Cup? Will they win Leagues Cup? Will they, maybe they get out of the group in CONCACAF, excuse me, in the Club World Cup? I would be skeptical of that, but it's not impossible. Maybe they actually make a run and claim MLS Cup. They should be favorites for a lot of those things, except for the Club World Cup. So a lot on the table for Miami. Interested to see that. I'm interested to see what of the next crop, and we've kind of talked about a lot of those teams can really push them, whether it's LAFC or Seattle or the Galaxy or Cincinnati. I think that's probably the next tier of teams with the Galaxy maybe on the very outside, maybe even a tier below those teams. But I think I'm curious to see how dangerous those teams are. Maybe what the next group is. Can the Red Bulls really push forward with Choupo-Moting in this team? Can they add a third DP? How good are Charlotte going to be this year? I'm curious about all those things. San Diego are a big one. Chicago, I think I already mentioned with Greg Berhalter how they turn around. I think Berhalter's going to be a really good coach in this league. I'm curious about the dual role that he's in and if the Fire's signings will be what they need to be. But this is a team that brought in probably five new starters, maybe six in this window. So it's a lot of change for a team. Maybe the last thing, there's a lot of angles that I can come out here with, but the last thing that does come to mind is Club World Cup, where I don't think Seattle or Miami are at all expected to get out of their groups. Miami are not favored to be one of the top two teams in their group. Seattle are absolutely the worst team in their group on quality. They've got some ridiculous matchups with PSG and Atletico Madrid, and it's just going to be
Botafogo.
interesting. Yeah, it's going to be a nightmare for them. But in some ways, it's a great situation because you can't lose. Even if you lose, nobody's going to be surprised, right? So you're kind of playing with house money there. I'm just interested to see how that works, what it looks like, what sorts of players are coming from Europe, how seriously these MLS teams take it, and maybe this will be at minimum a fun little tournament for MLS fans to watch and see some of these teams competing with the best in the world. And who knows, maybe we get a surprise and it's a lot more fun than we think.
Yeah, I mean that was gonna be my next point on what the expectations are for you for the Club World Cup. I think Seattle, as you mentioned, it's really difficult to ask them to advance in such a tough group. Miami has a little more opportunity, I guess, but
Yeah.
they're gonna play one of their two games in Atlanta, not in Miami. I think against Porto, they're playing in Atlanta. And then LOE is the one that eliminated the Sounders a couple of years back when they
Yep.
made the Cup World Cup. So it's still gonna be tough, but we'll see how that pans out. Just one of the last things I wanted to touch base with you. I mean, last year you were talking about your effort with backhill.com. So for people that are watching and listening to this, can you just tell them the type of content that you have on Backhill and what you get for your subscription?
Yeah, at the moment, we are one day away from having dropped all 30 of our MLS team by team season previews. Super in depth, going through off-season moves, all the notable ones. tactics, expectations, why this year could be great or why it could be horrible for your team, predictions, depth chart, all that stuff is up on the site right now. Really, really excited about that. We're going to have multiple recurring weekly columns throughout the MLS season, breaking down every team in the league, breaking down big stories. We've got a great crew of folks that are telling great feature stories, untold ones, trying to shine a light on some of the most interesting and most influential characters in Major League Soccer. And that sort of coverage for a lot of American soccer. We cover the United Soccer League if you're a fan of a team in one of those markets. I live in Phoenix, and we've got Phoenix Rising out here in my neck of the woods. Yeah, I see some great flags behind you as well. Like, we cover USL in great detail, the U.S. men's national team. We try to take coverage of this sport one step forward in American soccer, where we're not just going to tell you the score of the game and a little detail about the goals. We're going to try and actually dive into how games are won and lost and really peel back the curtain on some of these influential and interesting people inside the game. That is what we're trying to do at Backfield. We've got basically 5+ stories out every week. We'll keep you up to date on news as well. There's a lot, I think, that folks get for their subscription. So if you're an American soccer fan, I think you should check out backfield.com and maybe you'll be enticed to subscribe.
Awesome. Alrighty, so that's pretty much all the questions that I want to touch on. Is there anything else that you may want to talk about, either bold predictions or something else that you really want to mention before we head out?
I'm just dying to know about this Colombia thing. Please continue.
Alrighty, let's go ahead back to it. Alrighty. So let me just repeat it for. So in 2014, a Colombian team lost the league final. However, 24 hours later, its fans went out to the streets to celebrate the championship. How did this happen, or what happened? Can you guess? So I think 2014 is not necessarily a clue, but it might give you a little bit of an insight on.
So is that like a World Cup thing? Is that somehow tied to the World Cup?
Not really. This is just completely the league final. Is Atlético Nacional beats Junior de Barranquilla in the final, but for some reason, 24 hours later, Junior fans went out to the streets to celebrate as if they had won the title.
As if they'd won the title. I don't know. Colombian soccer is not a strong suit of mine.
Okay, so let me. I'm trying to come up with a hint to get you there without
related to a transfer or something along those lines.
No, I mean, they were led to believe something that wasn't happening regarding rules of the game. So,
I mean, some sort of goal being disallowed, or I really don't know. I'm not sure.
All right, let's skip on. It has to do with social media, and I think that will almost give it away. So what happened was there was like this weird, obscure Twitter profile that tweeted, hey, like the Colombian Federation is nullifying Atlético Nacional's title because apparently they made a forced substitution, which is against the rules, and people took that to heart, and they actually went out and celebrated as if Junior was going to eventually get the title because of that rule. But that wasn't true. This is why you don't just cross anything you see on social media.
Wow.
But there's articles. I mean, you can go and look at this is 2014. It was briefly it was barely touched on US media, but there are videos and there are stories about this happening in 2014.
That's wild. I've never heard of this before. That's crazy. Yeah, I guess maybe don't believe everything you read.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's crazy that in this day and age, like you have people going to celebrate a title when there's no title.
It's wild. That is truly wild.
All right. Thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate taking the time again. Appreciate taking the time to be here on the podcast, and best of luck on this 2025 season of
Thank
MLS.
you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Nice to see you.
This is just Lowery here, the Gold Club Podcast. Thank you so much. See you next time.